to give me your cell phone number. If we have any problems, complications, have to cancel at the last minute because of weather or some other emergency, I can let you know as soon as we know. So, but anyway, if you have any questions or want more information, give me a call at the number on that website, and we'd be happy to have anybody that's able to join us. Thanks. Okay. Thanks.
Alrighty. Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask everybody who's not currently muted to go ahead and mute themselves. If you don't know how to do that, I can help you in that process.
You're so strict.
All right, let's see. Okay. 1 second. Just looking at this picture makes me feel hot. I don't know about you guys, looking at that
Just
temperature gauge down there.
Just sitting on this back porch makes me hot.
Yeah. All right, so this is what we're going to discuss tonight. Why does heat and humidity build up inside gourds? What factors make heat and humidity higher inside gourds? How does moisture get into gourds? Why is this stuff even important? And how to fix these issues with gourds. Now, tonight we are not going to be talking about shading of gourds or shading of houses. If there is more information on those topics, we could have a separate meeting about those things. There's just enough information just on this very thing tonight, just to focus on this without taking all night long on that. So we have varying levels of experience among our attendees tonight, and I will ask you if you have a comment or question to save it till the end, and we will take your feedback at that time. So heat and humidity buildup and factors. So who loves those squishy little things in that top picture there? So as nestlings grow and get older and crowd the gourd space more, they exhale more, they poop more, and eventually they get to the point where their parents are not carrying out the fecal sacs as much or not at all, and that poop can build up in the gourd, and the poop is moist itself. So how else does heat build up? Well, as we know, gourds are in full sun. So that's a little icon on the bottom left. They're going to get hot. And this is especially going to be an issue if you're dealing with a gourd such as the two in the middle on the bottom there. That's an S&K gourd and a heath gourd, or any other gourd that might be what we call translucent. Now, in case you're not familiar with that word, translucent means that sunlight can get through the plastic. You can't necessarily see all the way through the plastic, but you can see the sunlight coming through. If you hold your hand behind a gourd lid that's translucent, you will be able to see the shadow of your hand. And that can create what we call a greenhouse effect in the gourd. So some of these more cheaply made gourds are translucent, and that can cause a lot of heat buildup in a gourd. As I mentioned earlier, lids can also be a problem. Many of the lids are translucent. Sometimes with certain brands of gourds, you can buy liners to pop into those gourds to help make them opaque. Opaque is another word I'll define. That means no light can come through that surface. That's opaque. And opacity is really what we want to go for when we're dealing with gourds to help prevent excessive heat buildup. So how does moisture get into gourds? So one way it gets into gourds is through the entrance hole. This can either be through rain, or it can be through silly wet birdies that decide to sit out in the rain. We've all seen them do that and get nice and wet and then decide to pop into their gourd and get moisture in that way. Another way moisture can get into gourds is through the hanging hole. Yet another way is connected to the hanging hole, and that's the way that they are hung if it's through a wire, especially if the wire is thinner than the hanging hole. Yet another way that has been discussed a lot last year and this year is, and for the example of Troyer tunnels, is through the push pin hole at the top.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. Another way that they can get in through, in case of Troyer horizontals, is through the hanging hole, through the push pin, and through the seams around the edge of the tunnel. And then another way they can get in, and most people don't even consider this, is through the bottom drainage holes of the gourd. And another way that it can get in is bouncing off the tunnels, excuse me, not the tunnels, the porches. If it's raining really hard, it can bounce off the porches and bounce into the entrance hole. And I actually witnessed this myself one year when I was watching the PMCA Nest Cam. It was raining really hard and I was watching the rain, and all of a sudden I could see those drops bouncing off the porch into the gourd. So you do want to have drainage holes in case rain is blowing in or bouncing in, but the drainage holes themselves can be an issue and can allow water in. And how that happens is if there's nesting material that's sticking out of those drainage holes, the water runs down the side of the gourd and it wicks up through the nesting material into the interior of the gourd. So why is it important to reduce heat and humidity buildup? Yes, sir. Yes.
Can you back up a slide, please?
I'll try.
I'll
Yes.
try not to interrupt you, but interestingly enough, I always thought that the nesting material sticking through the holes is what caused the water to wick up too. Not so. The gourds that we tested this winter had no nesting material in them, and it's got to be the surface tension of the water that just allows it to bubble up through those holes. I've known about this a long time, and I dismissed it as there is no way water can run straight uphill, but I was wrong. It does. Now, go ahead.
All righty. Now, if you're not itching yet, you will be after I show you these next few things. So why is it important to reduce heat and humidity buildup and keep moisture out? Well, there's many reasons. This is one of them. If anybody doesn't know what those tiny little dots are all over that person's hand, those are nest mites. And nest mites thrive in a humid, wet, warm environment in gourds. And they can be much worse after rainy periods. But if you have a situation where water is getting into gourds and constantly getting in, dripping in slowly, and they can start breeding in the nest material.
This is what a mite infestation looks like, folks. And you see all those little tiny bumps crawling around on that gourd. This is bad. There's 6 young in this gourd. I feel real bad for them right now. I'm going to get their gourd treated so they can be a little more comfortable.
Now you may have noticed, this is a video from several years ago, how that gourd is hanging by a wire. So that is one way that there was extra moisture in that nest. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So why is it important, again, to reduce heat and humidity buildup, etc.? So we know that unhealthy martins have a lower successful fledge rate and a lower chance of survival their first year. And this can be from various reasons like feather damage, anemia, being underweight, and premature fledging. Now, this guy here on the left was a jumper. And if martins are excessively hot, or if they are crawling with nest mites, or if they are starving, they can jump out of their gourds. And nobody wants to have to deal with jumpers. This picture here was sent to me by Brad. And that is some feather damage on the tail of his birds. And I'll let him talk to a little bit more about that later when it's his turn to present. This can happen when you've got a wet, mucky gourd on the inside. And same situation here with the feathers. So the martins are depending on us for their nesting conditions. So it's our responsibility to make them as healthy as we possibly can. So we want to see this beautiful martin instead. This is another picture that Brad sent me. This bird has beautiful, perfect feathers, and that bird will be able to fly much better. So now we're going to go on to how to fix issues. So we're going to start with venting gourds. So these aren't all the possible ways to vent gourds. These are just some of the more common ideas that are out there. And after we've talked about these, if you have other ideas and suggestions for how to do this during the Q&A, feel free to talk about that at that point. So here what we've got is a screw-in elbow, 90-degree elbow, and a hole has been drilled in the top of the gourd here. And then this elbow is screwed into place. And in this case, there are 2 elbows on this gourd. And they are in the top of the gourd to help vent the air up and out. Now, the goal isn't just to necessarily try to cool the gourd, because sometimes you can't really cool the gourd more than the ambient air temperature, but it's also to allow the gourd to dry out on the inside to vent some of that humidity, to keep the gourd from building up that humid, wet environment inside and keep it from sweating. So this is a great way to not only keep your nests a little bit cooler, but also to keep them a little bit drier on the inside. Now, when you use a PVC elbow like this, it's really important after you install it and screw it in to take some Lexol or whatever caulk of choice that you like to use and put it around those seams just to help prevent any kind of leaking issues. But generally, this is a pretty tight fit. But it's always a good idea when you install something like this to put a bit of caulk around it, just in case. Now, there's some other interesting ways to vent gourds out there, like I mentioned earlier. This photo was from the late Emil Pampel. Many of us knew him or talked with him over the years. He had passed away recently. This is one of the ideas he had for venting gourds, and he lives in Texas where it gets pretty hot. And what he did here was he cut part of the top of this gourd off here. And then he took a section of PVC, melted it a little bit, and connected it to the top of this gourd hanger to kind of shade this top where that's cut off to prevent rain intrusion, but allow the maximum amount of air to vent out here. So that's another idea from him. And then over here on the right is the idea that S&K Manufacturing uses if you are a person who has bow gourds, bow 11, bow 9 gourds. They have what they call a cooling cap. And in this example, you knock out this piece in the top here, and then you use their cooling cap and it fits over the top, and there is a little gap between the wall of the gourd and the way the cap fits on. And the idea is that the air goes up and out over the sides in this cooling cap. I tried a little experiment a couple of years ago and I could not find a picture of it today, but I did something kind of like this with a super gourd. I cut the top off and then I got a much larger PVC cap and put it over the top, kind of like this, drilled a hole through with the pipe to hang it as another idea, a way to try to vent it, just as an experiment. It seems to work fine, but it was a lot of work and I probably wouldn't do that for all of my gourds. Most of them have elbows. So moving on to a different type of gourd, here we've got Troyer horizontals, and some people prefer to put vents in their caps. So this is a situation where you could, in the cooler part of the season, earlier in the spring, have a solid cap, and then as it starts to warm up, you could switch it out with a cap that has a vent in it here. So that's an option if you're afraid to drill holes in your gourds or you're concerned about that. Troyer does have these little dimples in the back of their gourds that are supposed to be for ventilation if you want to drill those out. Personally, I find them a little small for where I am in the Southeast. I don't feel it's adequate ventilation. So I put elbows in the back of those. In this picture, this person had the 2 dimples drilled out and then decided to go ahead and drill an extra hole for more ventilation to put an elbow here. The Troyer horizontals that I have, I put 2 elbows in them up high on the back of the gourd, as high up as I can get, again, to allow physics to kind of work for me. to vent that air up as high as possible. Now we'll move on to waterproofing gourds. So the first thing here is the hanging hole. So, you know, earlier how we talked about how water can get in through the hanging hole, especially if you're hanging gourds using a thin wire. So one thing you can do is you can drill out the hole where the hanging hole was and insert a section of pipe. And in this example, I've got a section of PVC pipe that I've got caulked in here. And then the gourd just slides over the rack and is pinned into place here. And there's a little bit of pipe sticking out on each end of the gourd, and that is caulked in with Lexol on the front and on the back of the gourd to keep any water intrusion out there. And that prevents any rain from getting in through this side. So that's an idea there too. And you can see in this case too, the PVC elbows on the top of this gourd. Again, we're talking about waterproofing Troyer horizontals a little bit, gourds, tunnels, push pins, seams, etc. There's a lot of ways that water can sneak into a gourd. And this is just a little bit bigger picture that we saw earlier. So again, we've got this, where the tunnel comes onto the front here. You can waterproof this area here with some caulk. These push pins on the top of the tunnel, there have been some examples recently of people seeing that water just runs in through here too. So that's another good place to put some Lexol there. Some people have noticed water coming in at the top of the hanging holes of these Troyer horizontals. So there's two ways to fix that. Again, you could drill it out and insert a section of PVC pipe like shown in another slide, or you could use this fix that Troyer has advertised here that replaces the hanging hole with this section here that's supposed to fit the same hanging arm that this hole fits. And then this part here is shut away from the elements and is separate from the gourd of the body of the gourd. Now we're going to talk about the base a little bit. So the whole idea is to stop the water before it runs down to the drainage holes. And there's different ways to do that also, depending on your comfort level, your experience, and the tools you have available. So on this picture on the left, the water is being stopped from running down to the drainage holes by use of screen spline. So this is just the stuff that holds screen into a screen door. You can get it in various widths, and it's just glued onto the bottom of the gourd using Lexol. If you use Lexol to do this, you have to tape it for a couple of days for it to set. But once you do that, it holds it really well. So that's what's happening here. The water just would run down the side of the gourd and it would hit that screen spline and just drip off, and it doesn't have a chance to get into the holes here. Now, another idea that's been going around is to score up the bottom of the drainage holes with various tools. And this is a photo from Jean using a tool that I'm going to show in another slide coming up. And the idea is the same. That water droplet hits here and it can't go any further. It dissipates the water droplet, so it's not going to go down here into the drainage holes. And then this picture here on the right, I'm going to let Brad talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. This is the way he has chosen to modify the bottom of his drainage gourds, and he's had very good success with this method as well. So this is the Jean Flores method. This is exactly what she told me to say since she was not able to join us tonight. She uses a wood burning kit. You can order it from Amazon. It's $17. And it comes with all these various tips you can see here on the picture. And she said she used the thicker slanted edged one, which I believe is this one here, if you can see where my mouse is pointing, to scratch the surface up around the holes. And she did each hole here as seen in this picture. An advantage to doing it this way is you don't have a possibility of something coming unglued and coming off the gourd. This is a permanent fix here, and Brad will go into that a little bit more in detail in a minute. So what's next? So next, Brad is going to talk about his method of waffling the gourd bottoms, like in the picture I showed a minute ago. And then after Brad is done talking, we'll have time for additional input and question and answer time from anybody who may have questions.
All right, my turn.
Bye, Brad.
Okay, this started long ago. I read about it on the PMCA forum, not Facebook group. Is Ross Blanchard where you got your ideas from too, Courtney?
Yeah.
Okay. Ross lives in Southeast Alabama, and he had been doing this even on natural gourds long ago. And when I first read about water running up inside the drainage holes, I thought that cat's lost his mind. That there's no way that can happen. It does defy physics. So anyway, I had a bunch of jumpers last year. As Courtney showed the feathers on that nestling, you know, I kind of thought that was normal. That's what I was used to seeing. I've been doing it a long time, and you know, we just call them poopy feather martins. You'll find a jumper on the ground and pick it up, and it's got poop on its tail and poop on its wing tips, and you bring it in the house and wash it off, and you feed it, and you try to get it to fledge. But I wanted to do something this winter. Kathy Freeze and I communicated a lot because she had a lot of jumpers too. Kathy does a nest change, routine nest change at, Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, 12 to 15 days old. I think that's what she does.
She either does a 10-day or a 20-day, I think. I can't remember which. Yeah.
So I've done nest changes before. I've never just decided, hey, I'm going to change all my nests. But if one got really wet, then I would change it. Well, after last year, we had one of the wettest years on record, and she and I talked, and she had a bunch of jumpers too, and we're like, we got to come up with a solution and figure out where all this water's coming in. So I tested what Ross Blanchard had said, and he was 100% correct. Now, the way I tested it was took a perfectly clean gourd, put a blue shop towel in the bottom, poured kiln dried sand on top of it, and hung it out in the rain. And when I took the blue paper towel out, it was soaked. It was completely saturated with water. We also wanted to find something permanent. I won't comment on the attractiveness of the screen spline since Courtney is here, but it wasn't my favorite look. I was like, I don't want to look up at a bunch of black circles on the bottom of my gourd. But mainly I wanted something that was permanent. I have 185 gourds, and I didn't want to have to touch them again when I got finished. So Kathy and I tried, not that Kathy, but Kathy Freeze, who's not here. Her grandchildren have her tied to a fence post probably. We tried a lot of stuff. Tried putting a ring of caulk around the bottom of the gourd. That didn't work. Tried shaping a ring of caulk around the bottom of the gourd with a V notched trowel. That didn't work either. I tried some little, there's stems that go inside a airline tubing, stick through, glued it in place. That didn't work. Weed eater string tied through all the holes to give the water something to hit and fall off. That didn't work. Fishing line didn't work. The only thing it did come up with, but it wasn't permanent, was zip ties sticking straight down out the bottom of the holes worked. But who wants to look at a bunch of zip ties? So we're trying to come up with something permanent, and I work with metal every day. So, you know, I wanted to use my acetylene torch. So I cut a 5/8 bolt off, the head off, and I cut a crosshatch pattern in it with the cutting disc on a grinder, and made the stamp. And I don't have it because I can't find it. I think I gave it to somebody, but that's like 5 around each one. So now it takes a while, but it's permanent. And then Gene Flores said, well, I don't have a torch. I'm going to try a wood burning tool. And it worked just as good. We're just trying to disrupt the water to give it something to hit to break the surface tension so it drops off the gourd. I used, for my elbows, am I talking about all this now or just the bottom?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. If you want to put elbows in, go to Harbor Freight, get you a step bit, goes up 7/8 of an inch. Then go to Tractor Supply, get you one of these. That's a 1-inch pipe tap. national male pipe thread. No, I'm sorry, 3/4, because they're 3/4 elbows. You would think that would be very expensive, but it's not, because it's not made from metal. It's made from plastic. They're about $10 or $12. Then you take a 20 millimeter 8-point socket. You put the tap inside it. You put electrical tape on it. Then you don't have to pick it up out of the floor every time you tap a gourd. You do want to stop about 4 threads, 5 threads from the end, because it makes it fit more snugly. And like Courtney, I used Lexel when I put mine in. These are the elbows that I used. I started using black ones 10, 12 years ago. My thought was that the black plastic would heat up faster than the white plastic of the gourd. It would create some kind of updraft. And with my understanding of thermodynamics, I have no earthly idea if that's true, because I don't know anything about thermodynamics. So, but it made sense. But these are about half price of your PVC elbows. So that's a selling point too. As Courtney said, she showed how that's for your racks that hang front to back. Oh, that's an alternate. And I didn't pick that gourd, but that's an alternative to a PVC elbow. If you've got aluminum flashing laying at your house, you just drill a hole that you can barely see. And I made these little canopies and pop riveted them on. Those will never go anywhere. I did that mainly because I had some gourds stored in plastic boxes and rats chewed the holes out. So I had to do something. You guys would not believe how much water comes in around this push pan. It would blow your mind. Now, some of it's coming from around the tunnel itself, and I guess it collects on the push pan, but it is an absurd amount of water that comes in here on the Troyer gourds. So these are ones that I modified for hanging with wire, because that's how I hang mine. That's just 1/4-inch copper tubing, as Courtney said, Lexelled in place. I did rough the area up on the gourd with a Dremel and sanding spool, roughed the copper tubing up, and I went ahead and caulked my little dimples back up, because my thoughts were, if water can run in this way, it can run in this way. So I have a lot of gourds, and I did enough tests to prove to myself that water was getting in them in multiple different places. So I didn't see any reason to test some of my gourds this year, then do the rest of them next year. I just whole hog went out, and it took my son and I made 2 bolts. He would heat one until it was cherry red while I was stamping the bottom with the other one. We would swap vice grips, rinse, repeat 185 times. The good thing is I'll never have to do it again. But I can assure you of one thing. I've been a landlord for 19 years. I've had over 100 pair of martins for 15 years, and I have never seen better looking nestlings than we have this year. Even with the heat that we've had, I mean, y'all know how brutally hot it's been. I've had 3 jumpers this year, and I've got well over 50% of my colony has fledged. About 30% more will fledge this week. 2 of the jumpers, because of the banding study, we did figure out that they were from the same nest, a nest of 6. So something happened there, not sure, but it was not 2 random jumpers out of 2 different gourds. And then I had one down at the gourd racks I have at the barn, but I had more than that last year, and it was nice and cool. It was just really wet because they were in horrible shape. The first mites that I saw this season was the day Kyle was here last time to band. Which was this Thursday will be 2 weeks ago. I have never made it this far into season without seeing a mite, much less a mite explosion. Normally by fledging time, I've got gourds that look like what the video that Courtney posted. I am sold on this print. I'm sold on this completely. I will begin. This will be one of my soapboxes now that I can get on. But you know, if you've got 15 gourds to modify, it's going to take you like 2 afternoons after work, or you know, it's not going to take that long. I did all of mine start to finish, just working an hour or so in the afternoons in less than a month. So, Kyle, if you don't mind, unmute yourself. He's seen 4 different colonies this year, and he can tell you how my gourds compared dryness wise to the rest of them. So it's not just my opinion.
Yeah, so I spoke a little bit earlier before everybody got in here. The Florida colony does not have any of these modifications. They're super gourds, right?
Yes.
So in the Florida colony, most of those nests were soaked, especially after a big rain. And they had about 3 days straight of rain, which ended up causing a mite explosion in several gourds, and then ended up killing every nestling in 2 gourds. So that was pretty wild to see. As far as the other gourds go, their feathers were not great. Lynn's colony in Georgia definitely looked better, but I don't know what her rain situation was this year. Tiffany and Leroy definitely had some wet nests, and her feathers didn't look anywhere near as good as Brad's. So feather quality is extremely important, especially in migrating birds. And is it okay if I go into why the feathers are important?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna get nerdy here.
You might want to quickly tell everybody that, because most of these people weren't here. I'm trying to do 2 things at one time. Karen, remind me to answer that question later. Give us a quick. Kyle knows what he's talking about because.
So I know what I'm talking about because I'm a federally licensed bird bander. I've been banding birds for the past 16 years at this point. I've seen a lot of birds, put a lot of bands on birds, done a lot of research. So whenever these birds first hatch, the vast majority of their energy goes into feather production. So much so that their skull is not totally ossified by the time they fledge the nest. So bird skulls are made up of 2 different layers of bone. One ossifies to keep the brain in place, and then the second doesn't ossify until they're into their 2nd year. So they actually stop bone production to some extent until their feathers are fully in place. So with degraded feathers, migration is significantly more difficult. So if you think about, at least in the tail, 20% tail loss or feather loss on the entire tail has a significant impact on the amount of lift that these fledgers can get. So I'll have to do a little more research to verify this, but I would suspect that people with nicer feathers on martins will see less jumpers on the ground as they're starting to fledge, because nicer feathers get better lift.
Okay.
Is that what you wanted, Brad?
Yes, that's what I wanted. So I said I've had 3 jumpers. I've had 3 jumpers, but I found a couple more martins, a couple more nestlings on the ground. But when I walked up to them, I was enough incentive for them to get up and slowly fly, you know, across the pasture and gain altitude. But I really think that it's because the feather. You could take a fully grown nestling at my site and an ASY female and put them side by side, and from the top, looking at the wing tips and the tail feathers, you couldn't tell them apart. That's how perfect the feathers are. And I'm blown away by that and mad at myself because I assumed that less than perfect was normal. but it doesn't have to be. So it just takes time. The things that I've mentioned doing cost very little money. I bought these online at some sprinkler warehouse, and I bought them this year. So now I'm sure they're more expensive now, but they were 31 cents a piece. So, you know, we spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on our Martin setups, but don't let 30 cents keep you from ventilating your gourds. And that's just one of the things. I think it takes everything we've done that we've talked about to make it complete. You could do one modification, but you're going to have water coming in somewhere else. You know, if you're going to do it, I would suggest doing every one of them. It really doesn't take that much time. What are you going to do in the wintertime anyway? You know, it gets dark at 5 o'clock, eat supper at 6. Hey, we'll work on gourds for an hour. So that's how I did it. So back to you, Miss Coatney.
So just to kind of sum this up a bit, in a perfect world, the gourd manufacturers would be A, aware of all these issues, and B, take them seriously enough to implement changes in their molds. And some of the landlords have already talked to some of these manufacturers about this. So I'm hoping in the coming years there will be some changes. But until there are, it's up to us landlords to A, understand the science behind why these changes are needed to these gourds, and B, to implement them, because the martins depend on us for survival. So that's the big picture here, is to do what we can to keep our colonies healthy, to fledge as many babies as possible to sustain the population.
If any of you, trust me, Adam Troyer has had a lot of conversations with me about this year. I bring it up every time I get that opportunity. Plus, he saw it firsthand because he was down for that. Anyway, he came by the colony. So, but even so, if Troyer started selling a fully modified gourd tomorrow, I'm not buying them because I've already spent a whole lot of money. So I don't, you know, I'm big on using what you got. And if you do use natural gourds, and I wish I could, I just can't anymore. Ross Blanchard drilled one drainage hole in his natural gourds at the lowest point and glued a water hose washer to the bottom of his gourds, and that's how he kept water from going in there. I used to use the copper tubing on my natural gourds because if you didn't, the hanging holes would wear out, and I didn't realize then what I was accomplishing. But who knows, if I'd have glued that washer to the bottom, I might still be using natural gourds.
All right. Any other comments or feedback, Brad, about what we've been discussing before we move on to questions?
No.
Okay.
Not as far as I'm concerned. I know Karen has a question because I saw it pop up.
Yep, we had one before Karen.
Okay.
Sue asked, what do you use for the mites?
The only thing you should use for mites, there's two things. Carbaryl is the active ingredient in one kind of 7, and it's 5% dust. But now there's also a 5% dust that has something else in it. Anyway, it's a big long word. Don't use that in your martin nest. 7, or the insecticide Carbaryl, sold under the 7 name, used to carry an FDA label to use on poultry. There's a lot of things that carry a label to use inside a poultry house when poultry isn't present, but that is the only pesticide that has ever been approved to directly pour on a chicken. We used to take out pallets of 50-pound bags of 80% 7. We would pile it in the floor in hen houses and blow it out with a leaf blower, coating the chickens, the ceiling, the walls, the nests, the everything. they did not lose their label. It's no longer labeled for that, but they did not lose it. They did not renew the label because it's an extremely expensive process to jump through the FDA's hoops. So that one is completely safe. If you cannot find that, the only solution that is acceptable would be a pyrethrin, not permethrin, pyrethrin. It's made from chrysanthemum oil. So it is slightly more toxic to birds than carbaryl, according to the FDA or USDA, but it is still considered low in toxicity. Carbaryl is considered non-toxic to birds.
All right, next question from Karen says, is caulk the only thing you are doing for the push pins and seams on the Troyer tunnels?
Yes, I used Lexale. I don't know, maybe in Alabama we call it Lexale, and in North Carolina I'll call it Lexel. But anyway, it comes in a little tube that says Lexel. So, but yes, that's all. And I brought a really bad one, for example, because I couldn't find white. I had to use some clear, but all I did is caulked. I ran a bead and just smoothed it out. You have to use, like if you've ever used latex caulk, you lick your finger, you smooth it out. Don't try that with Lexel, or you're going to be wearing it on your finger for about a week. You use mineral spirits the same way. Just dip your finger in mineral spirits, then you smooth it out. And like I said, you can't tell, but the entire top of that pin is covered. Courtney posted pictures of a Troyer horizontal gourd earlier. I've never owned any until this year. I bought 6 to make northern ruffling swallow nests out of. Whole different subject. I was shocked at the amount of gap above the tunnel where those ridges that are molded into the gourd goes. If you have Troyer horizontal gourds, they're getting soaked because of that gap. Karen, I don't know who that gentleman is sitting beside you, but I can tell by the look on your face and how you're doing this, he's got a lot of work ahead of him.
I'm going to make a little comment about the Troyer horizontals myself. So at my home colony site, I have a mix of gourds, and only one of them happens to be a Troyer horizontal. And at the end of the season, that was the wettest gourd on my rack, and the only one that had mites in it after everybody had fledged. And this was before I had learned about needing to put Lexol around the push pins in the tunnel. And I did all that before the season started. So we'll see how it is at the end.
I'll be anxious to hear your report on that. Did you do the screens flying around the bottom too?
Of course. They all have to match.
Well, was that already done, or did you just do the tunnel this year?
I had already done the screen spline around all my gourds. That's been done for a few years. And I just added the Lexol around the push pins in the tunnel this year.
Okay. That's, yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how that goes.
I think it'll make a difference.
I'm sure it will. One thing that I failed to mention about my gourds being dry, Kyle, they came down, they being Emma Rhodes, him, Kyle, and TJ from USGS, TJ something, I can't remember his last name. So it had rained 2.5 inches. That was on Wednesday. Tuesday night here, it rained 2.5 inches. So I told them when they got here, I said, my gourds are going to be wet. There is no way they can, because it looked like tropical storm rain. So we went out to dinner Wednesday night, and as we were sitting there, you could just hear on the roof, and it was raining so hard that Emma looked out the window and went, whoa. So we got another close to 2 inches that night. So we were talking about it that night. I'm like, my gourds are going to be a mess. There's no way that this could prevent with the amount of rain we've had. And Kyle's about 7 feet tall. So he was the first one to get the nestlings out of the gourds. And I wasn't concerned about banding nestlings. I said, okay, Kyle, is the gourd dry, or how wet is the gourd? And he said, it's bone dry. So that was shocking to me.
All right, great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments that they want to add?
Kyle does.
All right, unmute yourself, Kyle.
So back to the mite explosion in the Florida colony. For anyone who doesn't know, I actually don't have a martin colony. I am here to absorb a bunch of information for the banding project that I'm doing. So I love being part of Purple Martin Fanatics. I love dealing with martins, but I don't personally have any. But I got some 7 dust with the 5% carbaryl from Brad for the Florida colony, and took it back to the team that's working on that colony, and got them to add 7 dust to every single gourd. And I should note that the gourds that had considerable number of mites, the 7 dust did not take care of 100% of them with one application. The following week, they were considerably less, and the nestling martins looked way better, but there were some stragglers, so they ended up putting a little bit more in there, and then that finished wiping out the rest of the mites. But it was definitely wet, gross gourds. We changed out a lot of nesting material while I was there. But one question I have, and Courtney, you may be able to answer this. I asked Brad and we couldn't come up with a good answer. But where do the adult birds pick these mites up?
That's a good question. There are a lot of theories on that, and I don't know for sure how scientific any of those are. Some people believe that they have a few of them on them when they come in for migration, and then they just breed under the nesting material. Other people believe that other species of birds drop them on the gourds. House sparrows and house finches are both notorious for carrying a lot of nest mites, but I couldn't say for sure how accurate any of those things are.
I don't know. I would assume they
Real
would
quick.
pick them up.
On
Yes.
the mite situation. Hi, this is Bernie. My main focus is bluebirds, and let me just tell you, I do everything I can to keep the tree swallows out of my bluebird boxes, because if a tree swallow gets in there, mites, you can't get rid of them for the whole season. And those wood boxes, you know, they just breed and breed. So I have problems with the tree swallows. So I'm wondering if it is the migration thing, since, you know, the purple martins and the tree swallows migrate up from the south. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. But, you know, I have house sparrows get in my boxes, and I don't have any mite problems. But man, those tree swallows, they just, if they're in there and they even start a nest, then you just know you're going to have mites in your box. And before I go, since I have the attention, look what came in the mail today. Yay! I got some caps so I can put the vents on.
Vented caps. I got.
I thought it was a CD for a minute
I
there.
did too.
We're like, what is she showing there? Yeah,
Yeah.
I got that. Because, you know, I have my one lonely gourd, but you know what was interesting? I had purchased some super gourds, and I have the Troy, or the tunnel gourd, and I have a house. So I gave them an option, because in my area, everybody has the houses. The martins came, and every single one, I only had one pair stay. They were just drawn to that tunnel gourd. They didn't even look. They would perch on the super gourd on the platform and look in, but they just went over to that tunnel gourd. It was the weirdest thing. And nobody looked at my house either. So my house is the most expensive house sparrow trap ever. So I'll leave it at that.
It's funny that you say that, because I should have been from Missouri, because I don't believe anything that I read on the internet. And I probably wouldn't believe this Zoom video if I hadn't done all the testing that I did. But when I first started is when tunnels were really just first becoming somewhat popular, and there was no commercial option for them. You had to make them yourself or buy them from Sandy Bunn, who lives in North Kakalaki, or however you say it.
North Kakalaki.
North Kakalaki. I can't say that. Anyway.
I bet Kelly can do it. He unmutes himself.
So I bought a tunnel, and then I reverse engineered it and made my own. I'm like, boy, boy, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to use all these. I'm not going to use them on every gourd. Well, the next year when I hung like half gourds with tunnels and half gourds without tunnels, all the tunnel gourds were picked before the ones without tunnels were used. And year before last, I had a plastic gourd that a porch, I don't know if I shot the porch off of it or broke off or something, but I'm a regular Annie Oakley over here. So I had a natural gourd in the barn that I had cut a WDC entrance in it, if any of you remember what those are. And I hung it up at my house, and it didn't have a porch on it. It had a clean plate. And that gourd did not get used 2 years in a row. Big old 12-inch natural gourd. And, you know, everybody says, oh, they like natural gourds better than they do plastic. I tell you what they like. They like a tunnel better than they like anything. Doesn't matter what it's attached to. So, Karen, are we caught up on questions?
We have, Karen
and
has a
chirpy
question.
nest. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't own a chirpy nest, so I can't completely answer that question, but I have seen them. I don't think you would have any modifications you would need to do to them. They're pretty well, the design on those was thought out pretty.
Yeah, they're dry. They're super dry, but I
Yeah,
wasn't sure if I needed to worry more about like maybe venting, but they do have those cutouts in them, which
right.
Seems to be working like
If
pretty
you
good.
could, I mean, it's not going to hurt to add ventilation to anything. I just don't know where you would do that.
Yeah, because they're metal, and I'm sorry.
Right. I would be.
Figure it out. I work in metal. We can figure it out.
There you go. If
Sorry.
if I did anything to a chirpy nest, it might be to put try to insulate the top or the west side of it somehow.
They get hot.
Yeah, aluminum radiates heat faster than anything else we use for purple martin housing. And that's one reason I don't have any, because I just can't imagine having nestlings in them now when it's supposed to be 100 degrees tomorrow in the baking sun. It'd be brutal.
Yeah, and the insides are black, so so they're opaque on the inside, but they're still hot when you pull the plates off to look at them. They're hot.
So Karen, you said you own chirpy nests. The thing that I wonder about with those is if you end up with a mite issue, how would you put powder in there? Because it's my impression that they have like a mesh kind of a bottom, and the powder would just fall through. So what would you do?
Yeah, you would have to just do a nest change. You just have to do the whole nest change with it, because that's one thing that is really nice about them. Because I have like Bernie, I have a house that's like a T14. It's the most expensive piece of yard art ever. But we had to like close doors so that we wouldn't have so many lights. But you just have to take the whole thing out, and it's actually super easy to do, but that's the only way you can do it. And they hardly ever, like the ones that use the chirpies, they just don't put a lot of nesting material on them. It's just interesting.
So I saw a comment from Sue. She said, I was shocked the mites survived our sub-zero temps this winter in Northwest Iowa. I just have one rack and didn't bring in my gourds, cleaned them this spring. And that does go to show why it's important to clean out your gourds at the end of the season if you can do that. So there's nowhere for them to overwinter.
I had a fly on my camera.
I was wondering about that. You were just wildly gesticulating for us to see if anybody would notice.
Oh, Kelly noticed. I saw him notice.
I was wondering what Kelly was laughing at, and then I looked over on the other side of the screen. Sue, did you want to?
I've got
Okay,
one
go ahead.
more related question. Sorry. And this mostly goes to Karen and what she was talking about with the chirpy gourds and doing nest changes with birds with mites. So I did the same thing in Florida before I ever had 7 dust, and pulled out all the nesting material, pulled the chicks out, completely washed and cleaned the gourd to where there wasn't a mite on it. And then restocked with clean nesting material and put those nestlings back in. So the problem was a week later, whenever I got back with the 7 dust, the mites that were still on the birds basically exploded again inside the gourd. So for folks with chirpy nests who the 7 dust doesn't really work for, do y'all have any solution to getting mites off of birds besides just drowning them in 7 dust?
No. That's a common, if you have a mite infestation, like the video that Courtney showed, if you start looking, they're not just on the gourd. They're on the gourd rack. They're on the gourd rack arms. They're crawling from gourd to gourd.
They're falling in your hair, in your eyebrows.
I never get any in my hair. It's not a problem, but Kelly is trying so hard to hold his composure over there. I don't think me and Kelly would need to sit by each other at church, but anyway, I don't even remember what we were talking about now.
We're talking about mites and chirpiness.
I will say this, and it's going to be broadcast on YouTube. I would not be scared to sprinkle a nest with 7 if I needed to. I wouldn't necessarily try to cover nestlings with it, but a little bit. Now, I'm talking about that much 7 dust on the end of the spoon is all you need. But just surely if you tapped it around on the nest a little bit, some of it would stay, but maybe it won't. I don't know. But that's something. Yeah, I know. That's something to consider, Kyle, because you're right. Just because you change your nest doesn't mean next week you're not going to have the same problem again.
Good points. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I do.
All right. Hey, Lindsay.
There's that troublemaker.
So I didn't know that the meeting was in Eastern time, so I've only been on here for like 20 minutes, but I did want to jump on because I did a lot of the gourd modifications this winter. And we had some pretty good rains at the end of May. I had pre-nested and used 7 dust. And then seems like Dad and I put some 7 on the nest a couple weeks ago after a pretty good rain. And then, well, maybe that was then. And we had, like you did, Brad, some sideways rain, got about 2 inches on Thursday evening here. And I had some family in town and we did a nest check and they were kind of curious about martins and stuff. And so, and I've been paying attention to that. All of my nests are bone dry. They're so dry, like the leaves are like have dust on them. So I did the, the waffling on the bottom and the Lexel on the pins and around the tunnels. And then for my horizontals, I bought those little plastic things that go through the gourd hanging hole. They're like, I think they're called the gourd enhancement kit. Put all those on my horizontals to seal off the hanging hole. And I've got great nests, dry, healthy birds, healthy nestlings. Like so far, everything's great. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to have mites tomorrow, but I'm kind of smack in the middle of 10 to 14 day, nestlings. And I'm shocked I didn't have any after that rain yet. So that's what I have to say about modifications.
Well, I'm glad you chimed in. Lindsay's in Missouri, by the way, for those of you who don't know, but she's one of the Purple Martin fanatics. So
love them.
But it has, I mean, I don't want to just keep repeating myself, but it's absolutely shocked and amazed me at how much healthier my nestlings look. And I've done nest checks every year for 19 years. I've seen a lot of martins, and there's no comparison, none at all, none whatsoever. So I'm sold. It's a good thing I'm sold because I'm done, because I don't have any more to do. So.
All right, last chance for any other questions or comments. Yes, Miss Kathy.
Yes, I jotted down a few things as we were talking. They're not in any particular order, but could I just share a little bit of input in case anybody, it might be
Sure.
helpful to people? On the Troyer horizontals, had really good success with them. I have 4 horizontal gourds and the rest up, I have 12 gourds, and so that would be 8 gourds or super gourds. But I have made these modifications that we're talking about. I did the screen spline around the bottom because Ross Blanchard and I emailed back and forth about it a bunch, and because I heard about that before I heard about any of the other options. So I did that. I did have trouble with, like Courtney said, with it coming loose if you don't keep it like taped in place to cure, to the Lexel to cure thoroughly. And I've sometimes in cleaning, a little piece of it will come loose and I'll have to just Lexel it back on. But I had trouble getting the screen spline to just stay in a circle. It wanted to like turn into figure eights and things. So Brad's solution may be simpler than my experience with the screen spline. I had made like a PVC tube as a frame and tried to caulk around the spline, but that was challenging for me. But they don't look too bad. But anyway, I also put 2 PVC elbows on the backs, upper rear sides. I can't figure out how to explain this, and of course all my gourds are on my rack, but mine kind of look like dog ears out the back sides of my gourds. So because I have to store my gourds up on their backs with the snout pointing up on the ceiling, and they come in my basement every winter because I don't have any barns or anything to put them in. And so, and I find them easier to work on if I can set the gourd on its back side with the snout tunnel pointing upwards, if I have to make modifications or swap out a tunnel or something. So I put mine on the upper rear, 2 of them on every gourd. And then of course on the super gourds on the top of the neck up near the hanging holes. But I did that, and then on the horizontal gourds, I did put PEX tubing instead of PVC tubing, because PEX was white and PVC was off-white, and I was just being OCD because I didn't want them off-white. I wanted them white. But I found out the PEX was kind of thick to deal with, and I had to drill out a pretty good chunk of the channel in that horizontal gourd, which I didn't like. But I've just discovered that PMCA sells this gourd leak stopper kit, and it's a very narrow, thin piece of, I think, aluminum tubing, which would not require as much drilling out of that plastic channel to get this to fit into it. And just make sure when you do that, if you use PEX or anything besides this, don't make it too long, otherwise you won't be able to get your hitch pin through the gourd hanging arm hole to secure your gourd on the rack. So just do a test sample and make sure you're not, if you're using any kind of other tubing, make sure you don't cut it too long, or you won't be able to get that hitch pin in to lock it onto your gourd arm. But after doing all of those changes last year and this year, I've had really good success with dryness and very few cases of mite explosions. I didn't, Brad, I'll have to get you to explain to me your different tools that you used for putting in the elbows some other time, because I didn't quite grasp all of that. But I think I used either a little hole saw or a spade bit, and then that step drill bit that somebody on the PCA forum told me about. And I just drilled that in. I didn't use anything to cut threads, but I used that step drill bit and just kept drilling just a little bit. I used like a smaller spade bit or hole saw than what I really needed to get most of the bulk of that hole out, and then use that step drill. And you can just drill in real gradual and then take your elbow and screw it in. And when it gets pretty snug, then it sort of self-taps threads in the gourd wall itself. And you get a really snug fit, much more so than just like taking a hole saw and making a hole and then trying to caulk a PVC elbow in. I mean, I can pick my gourds up by the PVC elbow if I want to, except for the ones that I went too far with the step drill bit and they're not as snug. But yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, but you'll have to show me exactly how you did that in the future, but so I can help other people. I also run some Teflon tape around it on those threads once you get ready to screw it in, just put it around the threads of the PVC elbow to make it a little bit more watertight, and then use that Lexel around the outside. By the way, I called that Lexel company one time and said, how do you pronounce the name of your product? And she told me Lexel, and every time every time she was telling me, she said, yes, Lexel, blah, 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 and Lexel. So anyway, for whatever that's worth. And then if you have vented caps and you don't have any solid caps, it's possible maybe you just bought vented caps with your gourds and they didn't send solid ones or something. Sandy Bunn taught me a little trick. You can take an extra large jumbo cotton ball and stuff it up in that elbow in the spring when you first hang your gourds, and that will keep all the martins warmth when it's cold from escaping out the elbow, making them colder. It'll keep that in. And then of course, when it gets hot and you walk outside and you're hot, make sure you remember to take all those cotton balls out. But yeah, I think that was everything, but thanks for letting me share. Maybe that helped somebody with a little something.
Sure. All right, everybody, I think we're going to wrap this up then. It's been a great discussion tonight. I hope this was useful and helpful for all of you, and we appreciate you joining us this evening.
Oh, wait.
Yep.
There was something that I thought about it and then I forgot. All right, if anybody decides to try this method, one thing that I did try that did not work was stamping one stamp on the center over those. So whether you do the stamping this way or use the wood burning tool, you got to go further away from that hole than you might think. So I did want to mention that, because one, you can also just take a 1/2 inch bolt and score the hex head and do the same thing. But one of them dead center of the hole is not enough to stop the water.
Good detail. Thank you, Brad. All right, folks, have a good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. This was
All righty.
great. Great to
Bye.
see everybody.